Welcome to Under the Dome. Returning to Town Meeting TV as part of our ongoing legislative coverage. We'll be checking in with legislators from around our coverage area in the next several months. Mondays at 12 p.m. You can watch online at youtube.com/townmeetingtv or on Comcast Channel 1087 or Burlington Telecom 17 and 217. If you have a question for our guests, you can call in at 802-862-3966 and we'll get you on the air. So today we're joined virtually by our two delegates from Burlington, two representatives. We have Tiff Bloomley and Gabrielle Stebbins. Both of you would like to introduce yourselves real quick and tell us what you're working on. Let's start with Gabrielle.
Good.
Okay. Great. Thank you so much for having us. My name is Gabrielle Stebbins, and I live in the south end of Burlington, along with Representative Bloomley. I serve on the House Transportation Committee, and there we pass your typical bills associated with, making sure town roads, bridges, highways, etc., trains, including the fact that soon we will have a train from Burlington to New York City coming this summer. Trains, planes, automobiles, but related to that, since about 40% of our emissions come from transportation, quite a bit of our work in the last few years has been to identify ways to transform how we move around and how we make that more affordable for Vermonters and how we give more choices, be it bus, be it sort of a rural Uber and whatnot. And related to that, my other job, besides being on the House Transportation Committee, is I am a managing consultant at a clean energy consulting firm. So I'm also very involved in a lot of the energy and environmental related bills. Meaning I keep a close tab on them, and I'm often trying to support them from behind the scenes by answering questions from constituents as well as from other state reps who may wonder what the details are behind various bills. And with that, Rep. Bloomley, if you want to say who you are.
Sorry about that. So my name's Tiff Bloomley, and I also am from the south end of Burlington. And so I sit on the House General Committee, and the House General Committee is it's a funny committee. It's called the kitchen sink of committees, and general is kind of the operative word in the title, House General, Housing, and Military Affairs. And we do everything from daylight savings time to abandoned swimming pools to liquor and lottery to the National Guard to affordable housing, employment law, and that's a lot. And it means having to set a lot of priorities or set parameters on priorities because, in everybody's peace of mind, their bill is a priority, right? And probably the areas where we've focused the most attention lies in racial justice, and I can talk a little bit about that later, and housing, and we've done some work in employment legislation to protect workers. So at any rate, that's the kind of work that we've done. And because it is so broad, and because we have been waiting to get a lot of things over from the Senate, there are things that, unfortunately, we have not been able to spend time on, which I'm hopeful we'll be able to address in the coming biennium. But anyway, so that's me.
Great. Thank you, Tiff. I think we'll stay with you. So last week we had John Kalaki in, who is your colleague on that committee, and he specifically wanted to ask you about affordable housing and some of those bills that you were working on in the past couple of weeks and where those are at. So could you give us a little update?
Thank God they're out of our committee now. We just passed them out last week, and they're two pretty they're two interesting bills. I'm not going to talk about them separately as bills because that doesn't really matter to most folks. It's I guess I want to talk about them in terms of how they address certain issues that have contributed to the housing crisis that we face. One, the crisis is a function of a number of different things, and I'm not trying to oversimplify things, but they're probably 7 different factors. One is a significant drop, an 87% drop in the actual construction of new housing since 1980. And zoning laws that have discouraged density in town centers, public underinvestment. We have raided the property transfer tax money that was supposed to go to VHCB and for other things, other priorities, but that has resulted in millions of dollars not spent on housing. We have a lot of property, maybe 4,000 to 6,000 units in the state that are offline because they're out of code. And that obviously constricts what's available to people. The wealth gap has put home ownership out of reach of a number of Vermonters, and short-term rental growth has grown in the state, which further constricts the market. And finally, climate and COVID refugees, folks who've moved into the area who can pay cash for houses and escalate the prices of homes has put an enormous pressure on the market and priced many people here out of markets all over the state. And so to address this range of needs, we've set up a fund to develop costs, to develop housing, which we would put money actually in the hands of developers who won't build housing because they can't recoup the cost of it. So it brings, by funding developers, we're helping to subsidize the cost of the house to bring that cost down to people who are, 120% of AMI. And of those houses that will be built, a third will be perpetually affordable through the model that Champlain Housing Trust has pioneered for so long. The legislation, it actually didn't come out of our committee, it's now in natural resources, incentivizes changes in zoning that would contribute to greater density. We are allocating a significant percentage of ARPA money to Vermont Housing Conservation Board that will fund new development and mobile home improvement funding that will help improve the mobile home stock, which is an important housing option for a lot of folks. When we've made a major investment in bringing properties back online, rental properties that are not up to code, and it can pay for weatherization, but it can also pay for all the things that are bringing that piece out of code. And it allows for accessory dwelling unit construction, and the single person households is the kind of the biggest growing share of the housing, the customer market for housing, and ADUs are one response to that. So there's also a grant program that is really explicit to meeting kind of the down payment needs and perhaps the rehab costs associated with buying a new home. And there's specific language in the legislation that would direct that money be, that specific outreach be done to BIPOC community organizations to make that funding available to them for first generation home buyers. There's also, and the last thing I'll just say is that there are also renter and homeowner protections built into both pieces of legislation. One relates to a registry of rental registry, which exists in Burlington, exists in a lot of different towns, and is really a safeguard because a lot of that kind of, a lot of what the inspection work that is done in smaller towns is done by volunteers who don't necessarily have any training, and they are, entering maybe their neighbor's house or, a friend's home, and it puts them in a very difficult position. So this would actually centralize the responsibility for complaint-driven inspection, calls for inspections. And then there's a contractor registry to protect people from contractors who do shoddy work or don't fulfill their end of the contract that they may have had with a homeowner to fix something. So it's a lot of words and a lot of pieces. It was, you know, one of the bills was classified as an omnibus bill, and it definitely was an omnibus bill. But I think that it actually addresses a wide range of the issues that have contributed to the housing crisis. It's certainly not, it doesn't solve it, but it's a step forward.
These are a set of really extensive bills, it sounds like. And as someone who's currently looking for housing and struggling with that mightily, I appreciate that the legislature has taken that up. So it's very important and it affects a lot of people.
It's a high priority. I think it was one of the highest priorities for the caucus this year, you know, on both sides of the legislature. So I'm hopeful that it will go through. I mean, obviously we've got to go through the money committees, and then the Senate has to review the changes that we've made, and then the governor has to decide whether he will sign the bills, because there are pieces of each bill that we know that the governor won't like, but we've also made some significant concessions to the concerns that he raised. So,
all right. So we'll go to Gabrielle on her work in the Transportation Committee. Gabrielle, so when I was looking through the agenda from last week, I saw an act related to miscellaneous changes to laws related to vehicles, and I saw that come up a few times. And I was just curious, what does that mean? It's a vague title for a bill, so I'm curious what is in there.
Yeah, it's you know, much of the work that the Transportation Committee does is work that really it's invisible until it doesn't work.
Right.
So for example, you know, if culverts aren't being replaced or if our bridges or roads aren't being maintained or paved correctly. So it's the bill that you refer to, you know, typically every year the Transportation Committee works through at least 2 bills, if not more. One is sort of the writ large transportation bill, which is where we typically see the prioritization of funding. This past year, we had a transportation bill that was well over $800 million. Quite a bit of that went to electric vehicles, electric vehicle charging stations, really trying to push through fare free for, well, it's for the entire state, but the one place that it wasn't going to be because it costs more because there are more riders and therefore there's less budget in response if you provide a fare free for public transit is in the Burlington area. So in our transportation bill is where you'll see a lot of those financial programmatic policy pieces. And then this bill that you just referenced, it's essentially the bill that relates to everything that you might think about the DMV. So everything related to registrations and when a vehicle is abandoned on the side of the highway, who picks it up? Who pays for it? How do we really identify that it is really abandoned and it's not someone's, you know, last financial asset? So we covered a number of different items in that bill. We also added on some items related to connecting the state climate action plan to our transportation planning, and also added in some items related to pedestrian safety and bicycling safety and updating our roads to try and improve them generally. So a lot of different pieces in that bill. A lot of it probably is not the most fascinating until it doesn't work. And then it's really important.
Right. Well, thank you for illuminating that for me. You brought up energy and climate change a few times as you've been talking through this. And so is there anything along those lines that you're working on in that committee right now that you'd like to talk about, or anything you're interested, or anything else in your committee generally that you'd like to bring up or talk about here?
Yeah, I think some of the pieces that we've done over the last 3-4 months, you know, we have established a number of programs to help people who've never been able to purchase a car, actually purchase a car, but not just any car, a more efficient car, so that ultimately, if the reason why they haven't been able to purchase a car is because they don't have a lot of money, then it really matters if they're buying a vehicle that costs a lot to fill up. So we have a program that really focuses on lower income Vermonters to help them be able to get to work, get to their doctor's appointments, get to daycare. We also have a program that is focused on helping lower income Vermonters, if they so choose, invest in electric vehicles. And then we have a whole statewide program that looks at where we should be putting electric vehicle charging stations, with the focus here that especially now that people are filling up at $4.19 and up, people are really feeling how expensive it is to try to get from point A to point B. And as a rural state, it's really critical that we identify other ways for people to live their lives in a way that they can afford and that is better overall in terms of climate, but also in terms of air quality and a host of other benefits. But yeah, there are a number of bills that the State House has passed, or rather the House has passed writ large related to climate change. There's a weatherization bill that is being discussed right now. There are some bills related to upgrading our state buildings. There's a clean heat standard. So a lot of different bills that all sort of intersect around this area of, as we're doing in transportation, how do we help people save money and also, use fewer fossil fuels, something that we rely upon from other countries that, clearly it has a very significant impact when there's global instability, what that means here at home.
Right. So are there any other items in your committees we haven't talked about yet, things that are personally important to you that we haven't touched on yet? Let's start with Tiff, that you'd like to go into.
Sure. We took a lot of testimony in the area of social justice, and our committee tends to get bills that relate to reparations or other equity issues that don't seem to fit into another committee. And we passed a bill that is currently in the Senate that would form a Truth and Reconciliation Commission. And it was a bill that came out of an apology that we passed last year that apologized for the General Assembly's role in promoting and funding eugenics in the state of Vermont. And so there were a couple of House members who sponsored a bill, and we as a committee fleshed it out. It was a short form bill when it came to us that lays out a process for forming a Truth and Reconciliation Commission that grows out of the eugenics apology, but would perhaps look more broadly at addressing state policies and practices that have contributed to discrimination and harmed particular communities, and the communities that we identified in the legislation, but the commission could broaden that, include the disabilities community, people of color, and Indigenous Vermonters. And I won't go into the details of how the commission will work. In fact, they're going to be defining that themselves. I think one of the most interesting pieces of work was how to avoid overly structuring and prescribing the work of a commission that needs, by definition, to be iterative and responsive and informed by the very communities that have been harmed by state policy. And so there's a selection panel that'll be named by an initial group of government officials. That selection panel then will develop and then host a statewide public process for selecting commissioners. Those commissioners will be supported by a staff and by possibly researchers. But what we did was we provided a container. We constructed a container within which that was solid enough in terms of its funding and the support that we gave it from the beginning, but that could really be responsive to what it learns over a period of time. And there's about a three-year period of work through which, so we don't want a report. I mean, we will get a report, but what we really want is we want this to help educate all of us about our own history, and to understand that the laws that might affect me in one way might affect other people in a very different way, or opportunities. And there will be very specific recommendations that come from this whole process that will point perhaps to reparations in all different kinds of forms, and not just in terms of cash, but perhaps scholarships or language programs, or it's really going to be, it's going to take conversations with a broad range of people within these communities, and they're not monolithic communities, to identify what's going to be meaningful. Right. So I'm particularly excited by this piece of work, and I also think it's going to be a really hard piece of work, and I'm really proud of the House for putting its support behind it, because we've put a fair amount of funding behind it, and I think that's appropriate and necessary. And I'm hopeful that the Senate will pass it and the governor will sign it into law.
Gabrielle, anything you'd like to add, or anything else you'd like to talk about? Same question.
Yeah, if you don't mind, I'd love to actually switch from my committee work and just highlight something that's really critical for our community, and for Burlingtonians, and for our children. For the last 25 years, we have been underweighting and overweighting students in terms of how we calibrate how much money is needed to teach our students. Basically, the structure is that a student, all students are set at 1. And then if a student comes from a community that's, more impoverished, then there is a slightly higher weight for that student. Or if a student is in high school, there's a higher weight for that. Because as you might imagine, in high school, you need labs, you might need AP courses, you have buses for sports, you have, maybe a theater, and, a whole host of additional educational costs if you want to give your student at that age the type of education that we have, as Vermonters, historically wanted to. And then obviously, there is a additional weight for folks who are English language learners. And there's a whole slew of weights that basically a report was done a few years ago that said, we haven't updated our weights in 25 years and we really need to. This is a bill called S-287. And right now it is in House Ways and Means. And it's a pretty critical bill because the conversation right now is whether or not we update our weights as per what this report recommended, or whether or not we look at a slightly different way to address the funding inequalities. And one of the terms for that approach is cost factor. And what we've really been hearing, both Representative Bloomley and myself, from our school board, our superintendent, from many of the communities that have either that they're rural, or they have a lot of new Americans, or that it's high school, is that we really do need those weights to be updated rather than taking a different approach right now at this time. A different approach may make a lot of sense in the future, and that's another conversation worth having. But I just wanted to highlight, if anybody's watching, this is something to keep an eye on, because it really does impact how we support our future and our children, who are going to be the ones taking care of us as we get older. So it's S287, and right now it's in Ways and Means.
Great. So we're coming up on time here. I want to give each of you a moment to talk about anything else that you didn't have a chance to go into, just real briefly. We'll start with you, Tiff. Closing statements kind of thing.
Well, I'm certainly hopeful that we will get our charter changes through the Senate and passed by the governor. That is it's been a priority for our delegation, and I think that, and I'm very hopeful. We've worked hard to try to get those through the various committees and over the House. No, I guess I would really welcome anybody to get in touch with Gabrielle and me to talk about any of the issues we raised or things we didn't talk about, because there's a lot happening right now, and things are very fluid. So your input is very helpful to us right now.
Great. Gabrielle?
Well, with 1 minute left, yes, just get in touch. And, keep in mind that people come to visit the State House often, and they're always kind of timid and looking into the building. And that house is your house. It is all of our house. So come visit, give us a call, send us an email. We are always interested in hearing your viewpoint. And we're also always learning, because it's really hard to know everything that's being picked up and discussed in the State House. So thanks for the opportunity to be here.
Yeah, well, thank you both.
Thanks a lot.
Yeah, absolutely. Thank you both for joining us. This has been great. Good to see both of you. And we will be returning next Monday at 12 p.m. with our Chittenden County Senators Kesharam Hinsdale and Thomas Chittenden, so you can continue to watch this at our YouTube channel, of course, and on our website at cctv.org, and of course always on our channels 1087 Burlington Telecom 17 and 217. So once again, thank you both for joining us, and we'll see you next week.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you. So